trials, where we forsake our friends and break the bonds of fellowship, but it is not this day. An hour of beer and shattered VKs where the age of students comes crashing down, but it is not this day. Today we drink! Mighty men, for that you hold dear on this river, I bid you stand. Men of Cardiff! Yes!
Hi, I'm Adam.
And I'm James, and welcome back to the Future, the show where me and Adam review a random trilogy and try not to talk absolute rubbish when we're doing it. Today we are finally going and reviewing the master of trilogies, the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
By which he means that I finally managed to sit him down for long enough to actually make him watch the things.
I'm not a big fan of epics, okay? So I just haven't gotten around to it.
Isn't my fault you've got a short attention span, James.
Right, let's get on to the Rotten Tomatoes scores.
So, what do you reckon the Rotten Tomatoes score is for Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring?
Well, okay, so I think The Fellowship of the Ring is like the second highest rated, in my opinion. So I think critic score is going to be bigger than audience score.
Okay,
I think
interesting.
Critic score for like 89.
Is that your final answer?
That is my final answer.
Okay, so you're 2 out, so 91% is the critic score.
Nice.
What do you think the audience is?
Like 83 or 84.
95.
Really? Okay, that's interesting. Okay. Turns out the Lord of the Ring fanboys aren't as judgmental.
No. So the critic consensus is that full of eye-popping visual effects and featuring a pitch-perfect cast, The Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Ring brings J.R.R. Tolkien's classic to vivid life. I think that just about does it justice, James. So I'm a massive fan of these films. I've been watching them since I was like 9, 10, 11. So I've been living with these films for a very long time. What was your first impression of Fellowship of the Ring?
So Fellowship of the Ring is kind of... I've got a weird relationship with Lord of the Rings because I've seen the first one already, but that was about 6 or 7 years ago. I've seen The Hobbits, and I've played the Shadow of War games.
Right.
So I understand the world, I know the characters, but Lord of the Rings, that 3-part trilogy, that specific story, didn't really know anything about. In terms of first impressions, it's very well structured. You know when the first act ends, you know when the second act begins, you know when then there's the mid, you know exactly when the middle of the film is.
Yeah.
The climax to it, like the final, like the ending of it, because it's the first film, it's not like this huge epic battle, but it still has like weight to it. You know, even though Sean Bean's character, I didn't really know because he's only been in that one film, and I knew he was going to die because he is Sean Bean.
Yeah.
There was still weight to that. I was sad that character had died, and his death is still very prevalent in the following films with his brother and his father and all that kind of stuff. So I like how it just wasn't a death for death's sake.
I feel like one of the things that Fellowship does incredibly effectively, leading off from what you just said about Boromir, is that it introduces you to these characters very quickly and makes it incredibly clear who they are, what their motivations are, and why you should care about them.
Exactly. It does that so well. And like Gandalf is such a bizarre character. I don't know where I sit with him because going into it, I'm like, oh, Dumbledore, Gandalf's this big, really impressive wizard, and then the first couple of scenes you see with him, and he's just like smoking weed and doing fireworks, and I'm like,
exactly.
I'm like, okay. But then you get to the end of the film, and he's defeating that big creature thing, and you're like, oh, he is a great wizard. This is cool. This is cool.
Yeah, that's the thing with a character like Gandalf. He starts off as kind of lower ranking, you could say, Gandalf the Grey. But then his journey is one of essentially receiving those powers and becoming basically the ultimate wizard in Middle-earth, essentially.
Odd character. If you asked me to like do a character sheet of what Gandalf was and what his dreams were and all that kind of stuff, I couldn't do it because he's such a weirdly complex character.
He really is. He's very multifaceted, and I think that a lot of credit for that has to go to Sir Ian McKellen, who is magnificent in the role.
What a guy! Watching these films, it was always odd when like Gandalf would like run or ride a horse or fight, because I just can't see Ian McKellen being that like dynamic or kinetic with his movement.
Right.
Just to jump ahead quickly, in the third film, when they're running at the Black Gate, you can see it's definitely CGI, but you can see Gandalf sprinting.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
the funniest thing I've ever seen. Just this, like, oh God, I don't know how old he was at that point, but he's just like, yeah.
He was still old. He was in his 60s or something at that point. I think that Ian McKellen's stunt double will have had a lot to do on those films.
Like, that's the thing, the fight scenes, I think, because the budget was so low, they didn't have a lot to work with in terms of like CGI and practical effects, and you can tell that in terms of just how they shoot fight scenes. When it's like CGI monsters,
Yeah.
There's always like a lot of shaky cam and a lot of close-ups, but so you don't see the poor CGI, but it also adds to like the kineticism of the fight as well.
Absolutely. I think that's something that is also in just the directing and editing style, because it carries over to the fully practical fights as well, like the fight at the end of the film. It's quite interesting you mentioned low budget, because I looked at the budgets for these films. They actually all have a budget of around about $100 million back in the early 2000s.
Was that high for the time?
I want to say yes, because like in inflation and all that, like film budgets these days like normally top out at 200, 300 million. But they definitely didn't have as unlimited resources to work with, particularly on that first one.
But the way they were able to get around that is just a testament to how good it is. Like,
absolutely.
The prosthetic work is some of the best like makeup work I've ever seen in any film.
It is astonishing, isn't it?
Could you imagine
incredible.
if that film came out today by a lesser director, all the orcs would have been CGI?
The Hobbit.
Yeah, The Hobbit.
Yeah.
No, that's a very
The
good
Hobbit,
point.
all of the orcs are CGI, basically. There's almost no practical stuff going on in lots of places. And it suffers for it, because you don't get that immediate sort of physical look at the character.
Speaking of like CGI characters, one thing I didn't know about this film, because I'd just forgotten, is just how they treat Gollum. Because Gollum is like synonymous for Lord of the Rings. He's like the main thing I know. Like, you know Gandalf, you know Frodo, you know Gollum, you know the Ring. The average person knows that. And Legolas, obviously. I thought Gollum was going to play a bigger role in the first film. But they keep
interesting.
They keep him in the shadows. You see his eyes and he's so creepy. He's so creepy. And then the second one and third one, they build on him. And the film knows when to pull back and not give you everything at once.
I see what you mean, yeah. So it's kind of like, when they're in the Dwarf Mine Moria, you see Gollum. Like, he's there, he's in the background, he's in the shadows. But he's just in the background in the shadows. You know he's following them, trying to follow the ring, but he doesn't reveal himself at that point. And I think that, again, is another wonderful bit of structuring, in terms of if you start including Gollum in the narrative at that point heavily, it's just too much character to work with, because you're having to get to know all 9 of the Fellowship first off, before they then split off into the second film.
Well, like, that's something I was thinking. There's so many characters, but I feel like I connected with all of them.
I'd agree with that.
There wasn't a single character where I was like, "Who's this? I don't want to spend time with this person."
Because, like, with films with large ensemble casts, generally you'll have, a couple of characters who you really connect with, and then others who are just kind of set dressing who you don't really care about.
But I think how they fixed that is the characters weren't individuals. So Aragorn, Gil, I've forgotten his name.
Come on, remember, come on, we can remember Gimli.
Gimli, that's it. And Legolas.
Come on.
Were an ensemble within an ensemble.
And
that's...
It's like you then have Pip and Merry, and then you have Frodo and Sam.
Yeah, like, that was really good, actually. Like, the 3 stories going on at the same time, which they just did in the films in general. Took me back to, like, Infinity War.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
Yeah, but Lord of the Rings did it so much better.
Oh, completely. Yeah.
That's one other thing I want to say about the film. It was so long. God, it was long.
Yeah, so the first one tops out in just under 3 hours.
I usually can't watch long films. I just get bored. I check my phone all the time. It generally kept my attention, and every scene was needed. Every scene was necessary. There was no filler. They could not physically make the film shorter.
There's a reason why there are extended editions of each of the films which are nearing 4 hours long. Like, there's so much they just cut out, and I think that the editing process must have been pretty brutal for these.
One day I'll get there. One day
we will watch the extended editions, but until that day. Okay, James. So, what rating would you give to Fellowship of the Ring?
I would give it a 7.5.
Mm.
Yeah, because it's fine, but it would be a while before I watched it again.
It's definitely one of those where you're not going to watch it. It's one of those you're going to watch every so often, like maybe every 6 months or so. It's not something you're going to watch endlessly over and over and over again because it's so much.
Yeah.
I would give it an 8 out of 10, I reckon.
Okay. Yeah, I think that works. I think that's
I think
pretty
it's
much
definitely
right.
the poorest of the trilogy, if anything, because it's the one that they made first, and therefore, in terms of the special effects, they just set up the special effects house Weta, who now do all the special effects in, like, the Planet of the Apes films, for instance. They did work on Infinity War and Endgame. They're huge.
Yeah.
And I think by the time they got down to the second film, they'd improved so much of the production stuff, they knew exactly what they were doing, which then leads us onto the Two Towers.
Two Towers.
What do you think the rating is for the Two Towers,
Two Towers,
James?
it's got to be like 98 or something.
Okay, it's 95%.
Oh, I'm getting good at these.
You're getting close,
and then audience, 100.
It's the same, 95.
Oh, interesting. Okay, interesting. Two Towers... Now, okay, Two Towers is a good film. It's good in its own right, it's got good character moments, it's got good everything, but it does, to me, feel like there wasn't much progress. Like, I like the story in its own right, but in how it furthered the actual narrative of the whole trilogy, it didn't really... It's like they took a detour.
Would you say that the characters stayed fairly static throughout that film?
Yeah, so what was the name of the kingdom that they were...
Rohan.
Rohan, yes. What? Why did they go to Rohan? Like, do you know what I'm trying to say? Like,
yeah, I get that. I mean...
I thought the trilogy was going to be about Frodo getting the ring to Mordor, and then suddenly they do a pit stop at this kingdom, and I'm like, wait, sorry, what's going on here? Wait, there's going to be a big battle. The climax of this is going to be Rohan, but that's not. It's Lord of the Rings. The ring is not relevant in this.
I get you. I mean,
I was not expecting the story to go that way. It kind of felt like it was filler because they didn't have anything else for the other characters to do.
Well, in terms of that, you're going to have to take it up with J.R.R. Tolkien, because they can only work with the original narrative, you know. But I see what you mean. I mean, one of the things I find quite interesting thinking about it is that the way in which the characters move and the storyline is very much dictated by the geography of where they're going. So you think about those sort of side plots. The Uruk-hai who capture Pip and Merry at the end of the first film are taking them to Isengard. In order to get to Isengard, you need to go through Rohan. Therefore, Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas run through Rohan. They encounter the riders, and it goes on and on.
Yeah. No, I get that. Like, the way I view it is like the events of the second film are like creating alliances and all that to make the ending of the third film a bit more justified.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like,
I see that.
Like another thing, like I really enjoyed the second one. I think it's the best one of the three. I think it's the most concisely and succinctly like structured. I love the tone and the style. Each characters have like really, really nice character moments. Like Pippin, I didn't think Pippin and Merry I don't think I'd vibe with them.
Yeah.
But they're so cool.
They're so funny and
them.
earnest.
When they're with like the Ent and everything. This might just be because I was expecting the story to go in a completely different direction, and it might be just because I've watched a lot of like. I keep on forgetting that these films are from the early 2000s. You know, Saruman. I thought he was going to be a bigger role.
Right. That's interesting.
He seemed to get defeated very easily, and once he was kind of defeated, he just kind of then went away. He didn't like try again. He was just like, oh, okay, oh, this one's fallen, I better move on. Like, he doesn't.
So to explain that, skipping ahead quickly to the beginning of the third film where he's up in his tower, he does actually get killed. In the original script, there's a death scene which they filmed, in which the character Grima Wormtongue stabs him in the back, but they cut that for time. It was one of the things that ended up on the cutting room floor.
It seems like pretty necessary. I was watching the third film and thinking, when's he going to turn up?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Because, and I think honestly, this is just me growing up in a world of superhero films where like someone rocks up at the last minute, or you know, I was expecting him to be a bit more.
That's fair enough. I guess in a situation in which you're juggling all of these characters, all of these parallel storylines, there's going to be some things that need to fall by the wayside at some point.
Ironically enough, I kind of expected his entire journey to go the same way Count Dooku's does in the prequels. Gets set up as like a good guy turned bad guy, second in command in the first film. In the second one, he's like the main villain of that film, and then he gets killed off in the beginning of the third film. Which is fairly similar. Yeah, exactly. I genuinely thought that was how it was going to go, and then he just kind of he gets defeated at Isengard.
Yep.
And then he just goes, "All right, okay, I tried." I expected him to be more of a threat.
Yep. I think it would be remiss of us in talking about this film if we didn't cover in some depth Gollum / Smeagol for a little while.
Gollum / Smeagol. Andy Serkis.
What a dude. What a dude, honestly.
So incredible. So incredible. He has made some of the most iconic characters in film, and Gollum's just...
Yeah.
He carries it. He carries it. Because...
Can you believe that character is from the early 2000s?
It's insane. It is insane.
Fully CG rendered character from the early 2000s who doesn't look like crap.
And they keep the facial expressions manually, didn't they?
Yeah.
By hand.
So at that point, excuse me for getting a little nerdy here. So at that point, they had what's called performance capture, in which they were only capturing sort of the body structure. They didn't have what's now called performance capture, in which you have all the dots over the face, and they can track the facial things. So what they had to do is they had to film everything 3 times over. Once with Andy Serkis on set with the actors, right? Another time with just the actors, no Andy Serkis, so a blank template shot essentially. And then about 6 months later, Andy Serkis would come back onto the capture stage and redo everything all over again for the motion capture.
It's madness. It's so blooming impressive. And like Gollum as a character, so I've seen the Hobbit films. I've seen all 3 of the Hobbit films. So my only experience with Gollum is the Hobbit films. And in that, he's just some sort of like raging, sort of like lunatic, almost like a...
Yeah. To be fair though, the riddle scene from the first Hobbit film is the best scene in the entire trilogy.
He's just sort of like a monster, this off-the-cuff character. But in The Lord of the Rings, he's smart and complex and...
he's... Yeah, completely.
And I was actually shocked. I thought I knew exactly where Gollum's story would kind of go. I knew exactly what he'd be like, but he was he shocked me, I think, with how they treated him as a character.
I think the key thing with Gollum is the fact that it isn't one character. It's 2 distinct characters in the same body, essentially. Because Smeagol is a totally different, pathetic little worm to the conniving, vicious little shit. You'll have to beat that out.
No, but like it's so easy to get the whole like Jekyll and Hyde aesthetic, and it being a bit like cringy, like it not quite hitting, but they nail it.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned whilst we were watching it is that when people do like impressions of Gollum, it's always impressions of Gollum, not of Smeagol.
Yeah.
Because I think that Smeagol is the more nuanced and difficult to do of the two.
Because he's a bit more like restrained. He's a bit more like not normal, but you know what I mean.
No,
like,
he's completely weird, but yeah, exactly. Another thing they do with the special effects, which I found so impressive, is that you can tell which of the two you're looking at just by looking at the face.
Yes. The way he holds himself and everything shifts.
Yeah.
You can tell absolutely. Going on to something else. Okay, Gandalf.
Yeah, back to Gandalf.
This complex character of a man just comes back to life with the only justification of, I've got things to do. I can't die yet.
Right.
I have things to do.
Right. Essentially, the explanation is that when he kills the Balrog at the beginning of the film, which you see happening, he essentially goes through some kind of transcendence to become the White Wizard. That is the explanation, essentially.
It just seems a bit... Is cheap the right word? I feel like if I read the books, I wouldn't have these problems with some of the plot holes.
Certainly. No, you'd be the biggest Middle-earth nerd there is. But
yeah, there are some. Ironically enough, my favourite film of the trilogy is the one I have the most issues with.
Oh dear.
But I just liked it, how like there was Pippin and Merry, and then there was like Frodo, Sam, and Gollum, and then there was like the Fellowship. These three stories going on at once, and it was just very well structured, and then they all converge.
It's the second film particularly is a masterclass in parallel editing and parallel storylines, because you're invested in each one at the same time, but at the same time it cuts between each one at logical stages. So one will lead into the other. One set of characters will be talking about XYZ thing happening, and then you'll be there with the characters they were just talking about. It just makes total sense whenever they cut. Yeah, no. One edit I think about quite a bit is when crikey, it's like they're talking about whether Frodo might be dead, and Gandalf goes, "No, Frodo isn't dead. Frodo isn't dead." And then there's like a pause, and then it cuts to Frodo asleep, and then Gollum planning to kill them. Yeah, it's so good. Such a good edit. I think, alright, final thoughts on the Two Towers. So my final thoughts are that it is utterly spectacular. The Battle of Helm's Deep is probably my favourite film battle of all time, to be honest. I absolutely love that thing. The scale at which they managed to do it is just utterly ridiculous. I'll get on to talking about how they did that stuff when we get onto the Battle of Minas Tirith in a moment. But I would give it a 9 out of 10. Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. 9 out of 10. It was just good. There are some problems with it, but the Helm's Deep battle, what they were able to do, considering the technical logistics of the time, was phenomenal. Just all round great film, actually. Yeah, it's a good time. You genuinely say that I put that on to enjoy it, not just sort of consume it and be challenged. It's a good time and it's a great film. Return of on to the final of the three. I watched the longest, incidentally. Right. Critic score is lower than the other two. 87. It's 93, actually. The thing is, everywhere I've looked, every sort of review place I've looked, besides Rotten Tomatoes, of course, it's always been the worst reviewed of the lot. Yep. And fans, I'd say, what, 95? 86. What? Oh, I think that makes sense because the review places I went on, like IMDb, are where fans review it. Yes, exactly. It's not IMDb is not like a critic review place, so that makes sense. Return of the King. I've got to remember what happens because sometimes these films kind of blend together. Yeah. drop me to kick off with this one then, as the
Can
one
you
who's
kick off?
slightly
Yeah.
more familiar. So with this film, you've got the almost impossible task of having to wrap up all the loose ends from all the different characters from all three films. You've got to also encompass one massive battle at the city of Minas Tirith, which takes up at least an hour and a bit of the runtime. It's really long, it's elongated, and it's incredibly spectacular. At the same time, you've got to keep the audience's attention, cutting between all these different storylines. Again, I think it's 3 storylines you end up with before they all converge at the end. Where to start? Let's start with Frodo, Sam and Gollum in this film.
Yeah. I really like the dynamic. There was always the conflict of whether Gollum is going to try and stir things. And also Frodo's becoming a bit more insane as time goes on.
Yes.
And it was interesting with how they edited it. So you'd go like at times like a half an hour without seeing them. And then as they got closer to the mountain, it would just like keep on cutting back to them quicker and quicker and quicker. There was more focus on them. And that godforsaken bloody spider.
Shelob.
Oh crikey, that spider did not. No, I didn't like that.
It's so impressive though, even to this day.
Some really impressive visual effects. And like Sam really proved himself during that as well.
Absolutely. I think the character who gets the most justice done during Return of the King compared to the other 3 is definitely Sam.
Yeah, no, I agree. Sam could have easily just been like a pretty bland side character, so Frodo is someone to talk to.
Yeah.
But no, he is one of the greatest characters in the thing. Which leads me on to one point about how Frodo is the worst character in the entire series. Because he's not a character, he is a plot device.
He is constantly getting himself into trouble for people to pull him out of it.
The only reason Frodo does anything is to further the narrative.
That's fair.
He's like, it's either to further the narrative or give Sam character development.
My feelings on Frodo as a whole is that he's the foil to Sauron, right? So he is the expression of pure goodness in this world and in the films. I think the development for him comes from the way in which you take that extreme good and then you watch it being degraded over time by the ring, which you definitely see. There's a couple of moments in the film where he does get pretty vicious.
I was not expecting, and it kind of makes sense when you think about it, I wasn't expecting Frodo to be sort of like so... I thought he would just throw the ring in there, but he refused. Gollum had to...
And that'd be it.
Yeah. Frodo didn't actually...
bite one of his fingers off, and then...
That's the thing. Why did the ring always go on the index finger?
Exactly.
It's a ring. It should be on the ring finger, no? It was always on the index finger.
I don't know. Phone Peter Jackson up, ask him.
Tolkien needs to answer some questions. I will write to his estate just with like a list.
A list of demands.
Like couple of questions about your series. Like, can we, for a brief moment, just talk about the Eagles?
Yes, we can talk about the Eagles. I know you're very keen to talk about the Eagles.
Why couldn't the Eagles fly them to the mountain?
It's the great question, isn't it? Like, everyone's obviously watched the history there, how it should have ended of these films, in which they go straight from Rivendell in the first film, the elf city, and then just get the Eagles to fly them all the way to Mount Doom and drop it in.
Because we were watching with our housemate Thea, and she was like, "Oh yeah, the Eagles are neutral. They don't really pick sides. They pick sides multiple times. Not only do they fight in the battle, but they also fly them home from the mountain." I don't know, but for some reason the Eagles just really... They could have solved every problem. They did not have to walk. But I'm sure there's an explanation if I just read the books.
Probably an explanation in there somewhere. I mean, from my point of view, after 9 odd hours of carefully paced, immaculately written character development and battle scenes, I think Peter Jackson just gets a pass. at that point,
no, he
because it's a
does, he
really
does.
cool moment when it happens.
Yes, it is. It is. Okay. The Battle of Minas Tirith. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Indeed. Now, this battle, I think, takes what they set up with the Battle of Helm's Deep and really turns everything up to 11. It's huge.
It's
One of the things I very much enjoy is the fact with the battles in this series, it isn't just the wide scope, you also get the focus in on the smaller characters in the battles, and it really adds impact. So that sequence where the orcs have broken into the city, and you get this mad sequence of handheld sort of shaky cam shots of just random civilians and soldiers getting absolute seven bells kicked out of them. I think just really sort of adds impact to the sequence.
something that Lord of the Rings does very well, and they do it quite a lot actually, is there's a battle and everything's lost, like they're going to be overrun, and then the film sort of goes, hey, remember this army that we set up maybe a film ago, maybe in the first act?
Yeah.
Oh, hello, what are they?
Yeah.
Over the hill, that army, you know. And you know what? I'm fine with it. When they go and get the army of the dead.
Yeah, that's
cool.
kind of the ultimate. Why couldn't those guys have turned up 12 hours beforehand? That would have been really convenient.
And I think I really like the fact that they just then was like, okay, now we've lost them again. Like, because they were a bit like overpowered.
Yeah.
You know, they just had that one moment, and then they were like, all right, we're gone.
I think another one of my favourite sequences in the entire series is the cavalry charge by the Rohirrim on the orcs. It's just that build-up sequence in which you have the men initially thinking, okay, we're all going to die here. We're going to go out fighting and go out well, but we're going to die. And the orcs going, look at this lot, bunch of losers. And then you slowly have the reversal of where actually the men are really up for it, and the orcs are going, oh my god, we're gonna die.
Don't the orcs like back away, don't they?
Yeah, they start sort of shifting backwards. They're like, ah.
It's so great. Weirdly, so Aragorn,
Yeah.
his story arc was so, in my opinion, like so subtle. Because when he finally became the leader and the king at the end, I was like, yeah, no, do you know what? This does feel justified. They have set this up. But as I've been watching the film, I was never thinking, okay, that's where his story is going to end.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have much to say about the last film. Because I just took it for what it was. Like,
I think it's the most plot-driven of all of them. For most of the characters, in terms of it's about things happening, but because the setup the first two films did, you still feel emotionally attached to the things that are happening and the characters that they're happening to.
it's just a testament to how good the first two films were.
Absolutely.
Like, when I finished the film, I was like, I feel so connected to all of these characters. I would love to rewatch the first film, seeing their introductions for the first time.
Yeah.
Now that I know who they are and what they go on to do.
Another thing that I can guarantee is you are never, ever going to be able to watch The Hobbit again. Because you've seen the real thing. You've seen the real thing now.
I want to watch The Hobbit again just to see. I hated Desolation of Smaug when I first watched it. Just because it's a terrible film.
Yeah. Right. Final thoughts on the trilogy as a whole and Return of the King.
The trilogy as a whole, I can't believe it took me 20 years to finally get around to watching it.
Yeah.
I as a person, I'm not into like medieval fantasy. That's why I haven't watched Game of Thrones. That's why I don't watch The Witcher. That's why I don't play Skyrim.
Yeah.
That's why I haven't watched Lord of the Rings until now. I so should have watched it earlier.
You really should have.
It's so good. Like, I'm not really into like 3-hour-long films. Not really into epics. Not really into medieval fantasy. But it was a good film.
Yeah.
Good set of films.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a reason why, I was shocked in disbelief at the fact you hadn't watched them when I first met you. And then ever since then, for the last year and a half, I've been pecking at you constantly to watch them. Because they're just objectively great films.
If we didn't have this, I wonder if I ever would have watched them.
Well, with me knowing you, then I would have made you watch them at some point, for definite.
Yeah, I know. I know you would have, yeah.
So, James, what rating would you give to Return of the King?
I would give Return of the King a solid 8.
Solid 8.
Yeah, because then you'd have Two Towers, Return of the King, Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah. I give it a solid 8.5. Just below Two Towers, mainly because it ends. We did count how many times this film ends, and it ends 6 and 2 1/2 times. So 6 proper endings, in which it fades to black, and you go, okay, like this is ended now.
Because you Thea were watching me, right?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, I know there's going to be a bunch of endings because it's got to do the whole resolution stuff. And then it got to the point, and I was like, right, yep, okay, the film's ended now.
Nope.
And I audibly just went, oh, for fuck's sake! There's another ending.
So it had 6 full endings, and then 2 half endings that could have been endings. And then, so from the first endings, the point where the film actually ends with the words "the end" on the screen, you have 22 minutes of ending, of epilogue, essentially.
So that was our review of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. We had a great time talking and watching it, and we hope you had a great time listening to us talk absolute rubbish. Until next time, I've been James.
I've been Adam, and this is Back to the Feature. Ba ba da ba ba da.